We're going to talk today about India and military diplomacy. Way back in 1853, a very small squadron of US Navy warships led by Commodore Matthew Perry docked at Tokyo Bay with the goal of establishing economic relations with Japan. Now, here's the thing. Perry was ready to use force if Japan refused. So here's a whole bunch of warships suddenly descending on Tokyo Bay, cannons and everything pointed right at the city, saying, here we are, talk to us. The Japanese agreed to negotiate a treaty because they realized that, they didn't have the gumption to sort of really take on such a huge flotilla that's just landed. And from there, the phrase gunboat diplomacy was coined. Basically, it was coined to describe the use or threat of military force to advance foreign policy objectives. Military diplomacy, on the other hand, however, is of slightly more recent vintage and can be defined as the pursuit of foreign policy objectives through peaceful employment of defense resources and capabilities. It means that I come to you, you can see that I am well armed and well able to sort of enforce my objectives on you, but I'm visibly telling you that I'm here to talk to you, and in other words, it implies that while I'm coming to you saying that, look, I want to talk to you and bring peace to you, I have the wherewithal to practice gunboat diplomacy if needed. Let's take another discussion, a quick step back in time. When India achieved independence from British rule on August 15th, 1947, its first Prime Minister had a really humongous task. Drawn by some before the British left, by British India majority in India. Now, sorry, I thought we got Can you, what was the last year it went? Hello?
Yeah, there was some problem. There was some problem. Okay.
So, should I go back to my last sentence?
No. Yeah, please continue.
Okay. So, this division was based on something called the two-nation theory, which argued that the Muslims living in the country were a separate nation by virtue of the different cultures, civilization, traditions, literature, language, religion, and way of life, which were incompatible with those of the majority Hindus of the subcontinent and were thus entitled to a state of their own. So, what did Sir Ratcliffe have to do? He had to basically look at the map of India and say that, okay, we have more Muslims here and more Hindus here. Wherever the Muslims are in a majority, that's where they get the country, and the rest of it is India. Population was one of the factors that he put into it, and the other factors were not really very, very clearly defined, but probably included, economic and geographical resources, communication, railway lines. I don't know what else was there as part of it. The end of it, the birth of East and West Pakistan on two ends of the Indian subcontinent, divided by almost 2,200 kilometers, which would be about 1,200 or 1,240 miles of Indian territory, and a forced mass migration that followed. Which I don't want to dwell too much on that, but 14 to 16 million people were forcibly displaced because they moved from areas which they believed to be dangerous to safer areas. My own family was part of that because my grandfather had to, they left Sylhet in what is today Bangladesh and what became East Pakistan about a couple of years before partition actually took place. About 200,000, an estimated 200,000 to 2 million of people were killed during this migration, all in the name of God, as well as by deadly diseases, which, tore through the camps and the refugee camps and everything that came up. It's been 7 decades since, but I think the scars of partition still haunt our subcontinent. If you look at the relationship between India and Pakistan, Pakistan eventually became a country which was basically non-India initially. Then they decided that they wanted to become Arabs. And I mean, it's a confusing state of mind now, but I guess they've reconciled. But to me, the irony of it all was that even after all that, India still had significantly more Muslims than those in, both these wings of Pakistan. Why, you'll realize soon why I'm bringing all this up into something which relates to defense diplomacy. I'm sure all of you know about all the horrors of partition and all that. But it is also important to remember that British India was never really a unified country. It was mostly a conglomeration of princely states which had sworn allegiance to the British crown. So post-independence, many of these states, dithered over whether to join India, whether to join Pakistan, or to remain independent. Kashmir was one of the prime examples because it was a Muslim majority state with a Hindu ruler. And obviously that rankled with Pakistan because they felt that, how can a country with a Muslim majority not be a part of Pakistan? Because after all, Pakistan was made for Muslims. Within a week or 10 days of independence, a whole bunch of raiders, or rather, Pakistani soldiers disguised as raiders or tribals, started coming into Kashmir to forcibly occupy it. And they had occupied almost half the state before the king, Maharaja Hari Singh, asked India for help. India said that, we can't help you unless you agree to accede to India. When he finally did, with a lot of negotiations, India airlifted troops to halt the Pakistani offensive. Otherwise, another couple of days and they would have occupied Srinagar. As if all this wasn't enough, Nehru also had to contend with a huge, hungry, diverse population in terms of language, ethnicity, caste. It was an incredible challenge. All these diverse states where people from the south had no clue about the culture and the languages and everything of the north and the east and the west. All of them bound together by this concept of, an independent India. On top of that, he also had to ensure the military did not step in and say that, look, this is a mess that the military can only handle. So what he did was, in fact, what the Indian National Congress had done before that, even before independence, they had sort of, done a few studies to understand that if we were to, because the Indian National Congress was basically the only major pan-Indian party at that time. They had done some studies and they had prepared a sort of a few blueprints on how to keep the military in place. So Nehru, one of the first things he did was when he, after becoming prime minister, he immediately went and said, in Mufti House, where the commander of the Indian forces, that was his residence, get out of here, this is my house. Okay. And there were a whole bunch of other steps that the Congress took. For instance, they set up paramilitary forces which answered to the government, whereas the army answered to the president of India, so that you had a separate armed force in case the military decided to stage a coup. And a whole lot of other things, by sowing dissension amongst the military leaders and a few other things, which was all deliberately planned. But what did all this do? While we didn't have military rule, and we didn't have military rule simply because all these steps were taken, also led to a huge gap between the army and the government, because the government made it a point to keep the army under its thumb, that civilians were the rulers and the army was just answerable to a civilian administration. One of the biggest mistakes Nehru made, or rather, I would say, yes, one of the biggest mistakes was by appointing his very close friend, Bengalil Krishna Menon, as his defense minister. Menon was a brilliant man, but he had this very condescending and divisive approach towards the military. He would play favorites and would always sneer and laugh at all the pomp and show which the British had left behind as part of the military traditions. And he made sure that no one from the military really challenged Nehru or the civil administration's sort of ill-informed strategic decisions. For instance, on how to deal with the People's Republic of China. What the government didn't say a word when China occupied Tibet in 1951. They actually went and said, yes, it's okay. Before that, Nehru used to say that, oh, the Tibetan border can be guarded by a couple of policemen with sticks. Nehru also decided not to take sides in the ongoing Cold War between the two superpowers at that time. The World War had just ended, and the two major superpowers at that time, the Soviet Union and the US, were sort of carving out spheres of influence. And Nehru said, no, I don't want to join either side. I want to be a non-aligned power. And he decided to side with the underdogs or other smaller countries which were, coming out of colonial sort of hangover and stuff like that. So given all these things, military diplomacy was the last thing on his mind. He really had to worry about so many things that he wanted India to be a force, but he didn't want India to be a force known for using power. He wanted to use soft power and India's cultural traditions and all that to be a leader of the colonial states that just come out of colonialism. If anything, one of the, and I'll be slightly provocative here, one of the reasons that we actually had the war with China, which was a seminal war, was, I think, mostly due to Nehru's mistakes. See, he actually believed that, he could get away by provoking China and that China would not have the gumption to sort of attack us. And he had this thing called the forward policy, which used our ill-equipped and ill-trained troops, some of them wearing, canvas sneakers, went all the way up into the mountains to sort of, to stake claim to territory which was not actually demarcated on the border. And that the Chinese were, noticing for a while. It actually took, the two-pronged invasion of India by China in October 1962 to sort of shake India out of its sort of sanctimonious sort of sense of moral and ethical superiority. I mean, that war really made India realize that made India learn the lesson that when it comes to diplomacy, might is right. Or I had this Mad magazine poster stuck on the wall of my cubicle in Darjeeling, which said, "The meek shall inherit the dirt." I think there's a lesson in that. I mean, as far as foreign policy goes. I mean, it's all right to be meek if you're a holy man or somebody who doesn't. Non-violence has its place, but when you are talking foreign policy, whether you like it or not, in Hindi they say, "Jiska laki uska bhains," and that sadly is the state of affairs even now. That war led to Menon's resignation. Some say it actually also hastened Nehru's death, and a huge sort of a revamp in our military might be immediately started buying more weapons. We trebled the number of our armed forces in about a few months. And many say that, Nehru, it actually hastened Nehru's death. Now, I don't know whether that part of it is true or not. But you see, the problem is just having power is not enough. We are a nuclear power now. So is Pakistan, and so is everybody else. Does that make us superior to the rest of the world? I don't know. There's this one of India's finest diplomats, Arundhati Ghosh. She became famous because when we were being forced by the Americans to sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty back in 1996, she became very famous because she was leading the Indian delegation, and she just went there and said, "Not now, not ever." That was her response to the American pressure to sign the CTBT, which India felt was, unfair because it allowed the nuclear weapon states to continue with their nuclear weapons while not allowing anybody else to ever access them. Arundhati Ghosh, I had a long chat with her after she retired. She was honestly one of our finest diplomats. And I just, quote a few things that she said then, This, I think I spoke to her in 2006 or 7. I spoke to her for almost half a day along with the ISC. I remember when we finished talking, I realized I had almost had about 9 cups of black coffee. So that kept me up for the next few days. But her quote's there, and if you go to Relive, I think you'll see the 3-part series that I did on the interview. I'll just quote her. She's, economically, today we have more power, relatively, compared to what we had 10 or 20 years ago. But we do not understand it. We do not know how to use it. We do not know how to project it. We are uncomfortable with it. We are more comfortable with the powerless. If you have power, you have to be able to use it, leverage it. But be very, very clear about what is it that you want. Ms. Ghosh passed away in 2016, I think. She got cancer. And, to me, it was a big loss because I used to go to her whenever I had questions on Indian foreign policy and things like that. And she was a very, very, straight talker and absolutely no nonsense kind of a lady. I wish we had more diplomats like her. Now, I'll give you a slightly personal reason of why this interview resonated with me. A few years ago, a few years before the interview, the parents of a young major who had been posted on the border with Pakistan at that time had come to me through a common friend. And, the story that they told me, when I think about it, even now it makes me sort of cringe with helplessness and anger. What they said was that, one night, 2 young soldiers from this major's unit, they were camped right on the border of Pakistan, stepped out to relieve themselves without following the standard operating procedure of alerting the sentry. They just said, "Oh, it's okay, we will just step out and come back." So when they didn't return in a while, a couple of their friends thought that, "Hey, they're not back, let's go out and look for them." And, it was just about to be dawn. And they sort of stumbled upon this horrific sight of these 2 youngsters. Their heads had been chopped off and they'd been impaled on a tree. And their testicles had been stuffed inside their mouths. And the bodies had been taken away. All they could see were these 2 heads stuck on a tree. They had been ambushed by a Pakistani border action team known for their sort of extreme brutality and barbarism. Fair enough. I believe that this sort of thing happens every now and then. The Pakistanis do that, and in turn the Indians go back and gun down a few Pakistani people. But while this major was trying to cope with this certain thing about, first of all, these 2 guys have gone out without following the protocol, which made them sort of under normal circumstances they would have been punished if they had come back. word came down from the headquarters that under no circumstances was the unit to retaliate because it would jeopardize some talks scheduled between the two nations. Now, this put the major in a bind because as the commanding officer, he show his face to his two of his comrades. So he thought he would do something a bit smart. He said, okay, I don't want to make an official thing. I will call for volunteers. I mean, it was a mere formality given that the entire unit was sort of baying for revenge. So they went into Pakistani territory. I believe they, ambushed a Pakistani team, shot a few people. I'm not sure what exactly they did or whether they actually managed to catch the bad team or not, and came back. The moment he returned, Major was arrested for disobeying orders, court-martialed, and jailed for life. I think he's still in jail. He's not going to come out. Now, obviously, the military does not take kindly to its men disobeying direct orders. You need to be punished. But what happens when the orders are given by people who, as I said, who don't understand power, who are willing to sort of, accept being provoked and still say, no, we still want to give peace a chance. Put bluntly, military diplomacy means being not just able, but willing to exercise that power when needed to further our foreign policy imperatives. And that does not always mean in a very aggressive or belligerent manner, which is what gunboat diplomacy is all about. Because defense resources and capabilities, if they are strong enough, are often used for peaceful purposes. And given the discipline, training, and capability of our forces, the military is often the first responder to major natural calamities like earthquakes, avalanches, tsunamis, as well as what is called HADR or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, search and rescue missions. And all these don't necessarily have to be just within our country. We do it across in our neighborhood, and sometimes beyond our neighborhood, particularly when it comes to our Navy. The Indian Navy is truly a blue water Navy. We have had operations across the world, and it's one of the most respected navies in the world because of the way it operates. So when we talk about, military diplomacy, we initially did not really understand what it means. We never really practiced gunboat diplomacy in that sense. We had a few, made a few sort of incursions, IPKF, and a few other sort of. We also did some good stuff when it came to Maldives, and we averted a coup attempt in Sri Lanka once, and we did a lot of small things which we don't really talk about much because some of our special forces believe that it is sort of bad luck. Talk about a few of the things that were done in secrecy. Today we have sort of left behind some of the initial hesitation we had in employing this tool, and we are using it as a sort of an important consequence of our foreign policy endeavors. But the way I see it, a lot has changed since Nehru's days. We have what a lot of people call a very hard line in with what government is, and they believe that we should use the military to exercise our might, and that India too has grown from an absolutely impoverished, third world country, and it's what fifth or sixth largest economy in the world. It's a massive country. We might not. We aspire to be a global power, but definitely we are a regional power. There is nobody in the region bar China which has, which even comes close to us in terms of military or economic might. So, if you look ahead, the way things are changing, the way things have already changed. You look at our relationship. Even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, was mostly based on weapons from Soviet Union, and we have this suspicion about the Americans. Some of us still do. Now that the Americans have become the sole superpower, a lot of our younger generation leaders believe that we should sort of align with them, or we have a problem. Our government right now believes in what they call a multilateral engagement, which means that we are not going to, which is not really non-alignment, which Nehru had spoken about, where we don't align with anybody. Here we talk about aligning with everybody. Now, that's also a complicated process because if you're going to be friends with Russia and China and America, and the other three guys don't like each other, eventually you're going to be asked to take a call that you're either with us or with them, and that's a very tough tightrope to walk. There will be increasing, I think, employment, for want of a better word, of various automatic and autonomous weapon systems in the world where human decisions will become less and less important, even though, there will be eventually a human will take charge. That's going to make wars of the future, that's going to make a lot of the interactions of the future very dependent on how we engage with the world around us. One of the ways of this engagement is by employing a military might to engage with the militaries of countries around us. There'll be actually less emphasis on emotions, passion, chance, because everything will sort of, artificial intelligence is going to come into play. Even the, the enemy seems to have changed. It's no longer country fighting country. We're fighting terrorists, we're fighting non-state actors. And so there's layers and layers of complexity coming in. And sometimes decisions are taken without really understanding the dimensions and the variables and prospects of how it works. A whole lot of our military diplomacy that we practice today is aimed at China. Much as we hate to admit it, we really don't have power right now to take on China because it is by ourselves, simply because it's ahead of us almost 5 times. Yes, we are both nuclear powers, but if you look at just conventional weaponry, that really doesn't have that kind of a military edge. We have soldiers who are extremely brave, they are well trained, they are now standing up and pushing back, which is something we never did earlier. When I was talking about this thing about this young guy from the major of who was sort of jailed, around that same time, our soldiers were told that if the Chinese come into Indian territory, on the disputed border, invite them over for a cup of tea. They, of course, we have soldiers who are there and they're very, very aggressively pushing back. So our relationship with the world has also changed a lot. And the expectations from India have also started making a difference, not just regionally, but also around the world. Our country needs to sort of adjust to that new reality. I think in some ways we are trying to do that. Limit wars and coercive diplomacy will be there. Cannot get away from it really. And as you can see right now, there's stuff going on in Ukraine everywhere. Every country in the world wants to ensure that its national interests come first. And I guess that's understandable. But if you don't have the military power, you'll have to just, sit back and accept that. Now, India has become a big power. India is also a nuclear power. And we need to adjust to this, new sort of range of national security complexities, and and we need to constantly review our internal and foreign policy and look at performance, what we're trying to do. In many ways, I think we can say that we are changing. the way we have restructuring our military, the way we are looking at the world through a global prism. But there are still gaps. Now, one of the ways of exercising military power is to be able to exercise with other, as I said earlier, to do military exercises and other exercises with other powers who are also in and around you. Military might is used both diplomacy and military diplomacy is essentially a very, very critical part of our foreign policy objective. You cannot have a foreign policy which does not depend on some form of either coercive military strength or cooperative military strength, which is what military diplomacy is all about. Today, I think we already have the other thing, of course, is to have military people representing you at diplomatic levels, where we have a military attaché posted at various embassies and places like that. But to give you an example, I think we have military attachés in about 45 countries. China has them in 90 countries. US has them in almost every country where they have a mission. So there is a difference. I mean, we still haven't gotten into that process of putting a military advisor into every country we go to because, well, we're trying. But then we have military institutions. Our defense institutes today, I think, train officers and soldiers from about 14 or 15 countries. And many of them have gone on to become leaders of those countries. Then we have regional defense forums, like we have the Shangri-La Dialogue and we have Raisina Dialogue in India. Then we have other areas of cooperation, like, for instance, combating sea piracy, establishment of air, sea traffic control, communication facilities, specialized infrastructure like ports, airfields, bridges, participation in each other's military parades, fleet reviews, air shows. All these help build a certain camaraderie and a certain what the military calls interoperability, which in turn helps us sort of project ourselves as the power to reckon with. Because every time you do that, the other side realizes that, these guys are equally good. These guys have the necessary thing. If needed, they can exercise military power for coercive purposes, and the rest of the world watching. So then there is, today's sort of terrorist afflicted world, we have, timely intelligence sharing. I think that too would fall under, the purview of military diplomacy. Officers' education and training is also important, particularly when you send our soldiers to, let's say, train in some other countries, officer training and others. I mean, we used to have a whole bunch of Afghans. Most of the Afghan officers and people have been trained by India. Okay. Then, of course, we have, like I said, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. We have, I think in Lebanon, we have something called Operation Sukoon. Libya, we had Operation Safe Homecoming. Yemen, then we provided definitely the 2004 tsunami. I think India was one of the biggest players in terms of offering aid. Numerous countries around us, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Myanmar. Then we had, whenever there's a cyclone, for instance, we had Nargis in Myanmar, Cyclone Sidr in Bangladesh. And then we had, earthquakes where we had Operation Maitri, it was called, I think, when Nepal had an earthquake. So today we have, when we talk about defense diplomacy, we're talking about sort of strategic signaling that we are at par. We have the same technology, the same kind of equipment where we can work together. And it sends out the message to people who are not part of that group that here is a power to be reckoned with, And the people who are training with us, it helps us sort of, build bonds and helps us be a part of a bigger group. Which today we have things like, OP India, OP, what is called, Indra. We used to have that in Russia where, We have regular exercises in the Bay of Bengal. We have 17-country drill called Operation Zapad in Russia. We have quadrilateral exercises called the Malabar, where, which is causing so much concern in the Indo-Pacific. As I said earlier, most of our military diplomacy right now is aimed at sending a message to China that we are not a pushover. A lot of the pushback that we are exercising right now with China comes with the sort of, belief that we have other big countries backing us. I mean, mostly the US, but I personally don't know whether we should trust any country. Be ready to, as we have seen with Afghanistan, I don't think we should depend too much on the US or any other country to come and help us unless it is also in their benefit. Okay. Then we recently had Operation Surya Kiran, we had Quad plus UK, where we had a huge, what was it? I think Queen Elizabeth, one of the biggest aircraft carriers coming in. Then we have Mitra Shakti with Sri Lanka, Jaya Warrior with the UK, Yuddha Abhyas with the US, Shakti with France. Many of these exercises, like I said, are sort of a signaling to China that it's not just thing. We have also been using our military to step up relationships with Africa, where China is sort of where China sees Africa as its new geopolitical background. We used to have actually a hand-in-hand exercise with China, military exercise with China, but I think they've cancelled that for the last couple of years because of the clashes we've had in the border. And we mustn't forget the 2+2 ministerial meetings and defense agreements that we've been signing left, right, and center. The 2+2 are meetings between the foreign minister and the defense ministers of the countries that are taking part. We have them with the US, with Russia, with Japan, Australia. So these are all examples of exercising military power in a manner which is seen as peaceful, but which is also a sign that if needed, we can use it for aggressive measures. Now, we've done a lot of so-called foundational agreements with the US, where we are allowed to use each other's bases. We have signed 4 foundational security agreements with the Americans, basic exchange and cooperation agreement for spatial information. Then the GSOMIA, which is the General Security or Military Information Agreement, the Logistics Support Agreement, and the Communications and Information Security Agreement. However, we still have a sort of a hangover from the colonial times or from Nehru's time of always believing that the civilian government has to have the last say when it comes to strategy and when it comes to that at times I have personally seen senior generals groveling before some babu in the defense ministry, who gets great kicks out of knowing that here's a guy who's got so many medals and he's coming and bowing and scraping before me. That sir, please sign this so that I can get some guns for my people. That guy himself might not even know the difference between a handgun and a cannon, but so we have serving military chiefs who are just confining themselves to bread and butter defense service, like equipment, procurement, organization, manpower, and all that, and they never get involved in strategy and foreign policy, and we need to do that in today's world, and we haven't quite reached that yet. I think I've exceeded my half an hour by a few minutes, because like I said, once I have a captive audience, I can talk on and on and on. Let me just quickly come back with one small thing. This Atmanirbhar thing that we're trying to do, I think is very, very critical for India. Even though right now it is more like assemble in India than make in India in many ways. I mean, it's a shame that we as a country still can't make a jet engine, but that's another story. We are moving in the right direction. I think India has realized that in order to be a player, whether a regional player or as a global, we want a seat at the world's top table. Using military diplomacy is a must. Right now, the total lack of synergy that we used to have between the political and the diplomatic and the bureaucratic, sections, that seems to be sort of emerging. But we have a long, long way to go. I think with that, I'll close it because I think I've exceeded my half an hour by about 10, 15 minutes, because I'd rather like to answer questions, if I may, from all of you. I hope I've not rambled unnecessarily. I think this is a subject, as you can see, I feel pretty strongly about, and I have some personal views on the thing as well. But I guess that comes. I mean, everybody has their personal views. As a journalist, I try very hard to keep my personal views separate and try and approach things very, very neutrally. But there are places where you can't help but get your own personal views into place. And I tend to get excited when I talk about how the way the military. To me, it is also sad sometimes to see how the military is being slowly subverted for political gains. I don't think that's a very good way to do things, but we'll talk about that maybe sometime later, because that's something I also feel very strongly about. It is not a happy thought to have the military being subverted. For our military is possibly the only secular institution we have in the country, and I feel very strongly about it. To subvert that for political gains could be a sad state. I think I'll end there and open it up for questions. I'm sorry, Dr. Gaur.
No, it's all right. I mean, the subject is so vast, and it had to be dealt with very comprehensively. And I think you have done full justice to the discussion. Now, with your permission, I will ask my participants to put questions to you.
I can answer them. I'd be happy to.
Yeah. Yes. Questions, please.
Good evening, sir.
Sure.
So, am I audible and visible?
Yes, absolutely.
Very good evening. I am Akriti Verma, and I'm a final year student of Masters in International Relations. So, my question to you is very simple. That over the years, we have seen military diplomacy evolving the ties between the nations. So, could you please just throw a light on that? That's it.
What I'm hearing is you want to know how have we sort of evolved.
How it has evolved or how it will evolve in the future.
Well, as I explained, post-independence, there was this fear that there could be a military takeover. We've had that in our neighboring countries. Pakistan has had more years under military rule than under civilian rule, and even today, the military rules by proxy. Okay, we have had military rule in Bangladesh, we have had military rule in Myanmar. Around us, every neighbor of ours almost has had some form of. But India, barring emergency, which wasn't really military rule as such, a political thing, we never had it because of certain steps taken by the government. Because they had anticipated that there was a possibility of, the military taking over, because if there was too much chaos in the country, the public themselves might have come up and said, you know what? Military can handle this because of the discipline. The normal civilian government is proving ineffective. And but in the process, what happened was it sort of brought about a divide between the military and the civilian government. I don't think that divide has been fully bridged yet, even though the government here is trying. And I think the government's attempt has actually gone to the other extreme of trying to co-opt the military, which is not such a great idea. I think it is important. In fact, it is critical that the two stay apart. For all those interested, I will send you a couple of articles I've written on the subject for various people if you ask me later on. But over the years, particularly post the 1962 war, India realized that you cannot be a power unless you have a strong military power. You can be a strong economic power like Japan. You can be a strong moral authority like we used to think we had, because we thought that we were, the leaders of the other countries which had escaped colonial rule. But unless you have the power and the willingness to use it, when it comes to defending your foreign policy objectives, you will always remain a non-player in the global domain. Now, this may not be the ideal situation, but we do not live in an ideal world. Ideally, yes, we would all love to live in peace and harmony. But in international relations, they have this thing called the Big Brother syndrome. The Big Brother syndrome says that if I am a big country and I'm surrounded by smaller countries, I might be arming myself for defensive measures. Okay. But all my neighbors will start getting worried, that thinking that he's arming himself means tomorrow he might come to overtake us and run over us, or try to. So you have to balance that out. And if you are a big country, you need to act like one. You cannot afford to be. Kindness is still often taken as weakness. I would say that we are trying now to correct some of those mistakes. We're making some structural changes in the military, in the way the military and the civilian government interact. We're bringing more strategic thinking into the government policy, but we still have a long way to go. And it's a very difficult balance. You cannot really use the military for there are foreign policy imperatives that sometimes the military might not understand. They will only look at it from military perspective. But we are trying now, and I think that's a positive sign. Does that sort of answer your question somewhat? Or?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you for the wonderful session.
Yes. Next question.
Good evening, sir.
Hi.
This is Achilles Dwivedi, a doctoral student of Defense and Strategic Studies. So, sir, like you have mentioned that Indian Armed Forces have been lately involved, are like quite active in HADR operations in the countries and even in Indian Ocean region. So, could we consider that these operations become a major mission abroad for the Indian Armed Forces in coming years? And one more question is there, sir, like can this military diplomacy reset our ties with our neighboring countries?
As far as your first question goes, I think the Indian Navy has done, it is now truly a blue water Navy. And the kind of sort of respect shown to our Navy across the world, I haven't seen that in a lot of places. For instance, when we tried to rescue Indians from Lebanon during the time that it was, because many countries allow only Indian vessels to come and do the rescue. So the other governments say, since you're only allowed, please rescue our citizens. We've had instances like that happen. Because of the sheer respect that our forces have earned in terms of their neutrality, in terms of their professionalism, in terms of not taking sides. We are one of the largest how would I say offers of our UN peacekeeping mission. One of the largest teams is the Indian one. And again, wherever we go, the Indian team is always respected. Whereas others are known for being partisan. So yes, our armed forces are actually practicing military diplomacy the way it should be, because you can't do military diplomacy in a partisan manner. You can't go to, let's say, on a peacekeeping mission where you're blatantly known to be aligned with one particular side wherever. And even if you are, then you should the military should be very clear that that we have come here to save one side, not to bring peacekeeping missions. Our peacekeepers are respected worldwide. Our training and things that we offer, increasing number of people are sending their officers for training in Indian institutions. So yes, I think our armed forces are in many ways that are ambassadors in various countries. As far as our neighboring countries are concerned, I think we have some issues. I'll give you an example of a slightly awkward thing here. We think the Bay of Bengal is our territory, right? Okay. We believe that we dominate that region. We are the biggest power in that region. I'm not even going beyond the Bay of Bengal. I'm just not even going south of that. Bangladesh has 2 ancient Chinese submarines, almost gifted to them. Okay. The Chinese have, when you use submarines, what do you use submarines for? Because they're stealthy things, nobody knows where they are, and you can use it to map the floor so that I can send a submarine to find out, okay, these are the areas where a bigger vessel can hide. This is the places nuclear submarine can lurk, to understand the domain underwater. The Chinese have sent so-called trainers who operate these ships in the Bay of Bengal, because when they have the right to the Bay of Bengal, we can't do a thing about it. So we just there and of course these are ancient Ming-class submarines, but you have Chinese operators sitting in there, ostensibly training Bangladeshi submariners, but they're sitting there and mining or mapping the Bay of Bengal, which would in turn give the Chinese a lot of strategic depth as and when they come in, because they would have the entire floor mapped out. They would also know where we have set mines, where are the peak areas. So those are areas where we can't really do much, because we could use force and say that, hey, you know what, you can't sail your ship unless you take permission from us. That would be bullying. The other place where we have a problem is that a lot of our regional foreign policy is dependent on, I don't see why Bengal politics should dictate our relationship with Bangladesh. I don't see why Tamil Nadu politics should dictate our relationship with Sri Lanka. But it does. And those are things done for political compulsions, and unfortunately, whether you like it or not, that's how it is. There's not much you can do about it. One of the reasons why the IPKF thing turned out to be such a fiasco was because the central government and the Tamil Nadu government had totally opposite views. So you had a country which was doing 2 different things. It was training the LTT and fighting the LTT at the same time. Those, I think, are factors which we need to address before we really start speaking in one voice with our neighbor. So until then, I think our neighbors will always be a bit wary of us. And like I said, that big brother syndrome will always be there. The opposition parties will always say, you know what, I will protect you against aggression by India. In Pakistan, for instance, we have a lot of our politicians and other people suddenly start talking about like Akhand Bharat, which means, bring back India of the old days. Once the country has become independent, it's very difficult to suddenly convince them that please join us. Nobody has ever done that, because if you're a Pakistani, you're not going to sit there and say, oh, tomorrow I think I want to join India. No Pakistani will say that, because they're proud of their own country, just like we are proud of our own country. What it actually does is, we might be talking about Akhand Bharat in a philosophical manner that one day we'll have. But what it does is the Pakistani army uses that to assert its dominance in the country. It actually goes to the population and says, watch out, see, the Indians want to overrun us. So hence, we want more money, we want more weapons without us. So we are actually, helping the Pakistani military by talking about such things. Those are things our politicians, our leadership must understand. Unfortunately, they don't. So when we talk about relationships with our neighboring countries, we need to sensitize our own people first. And then we need to also sensitize them that it cannot be done on the basis of regional politics, but unfortunately, right now it still is. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Not at all. Is there anybody else? I'm waiting for a particular question, but I am not getting somebody who, I thought I had made a few provocative statements, which I thought could be challenged, but nobody seems to be stepping up to that. Nobody seems to be,
Yeah, next question.
So.
Good evening, sir.
Hi, Anushka.
Hello. Yeah, hi. So first of all, thank you for such insightful session. I'm a final year mass media student at Jain College, Mumbai. So my question is not related to contemporary times. It's related to Nehru's role in shaping India's foreign policy? Like, it's very basic, but at the same time, it's hugely debated. So I would like to hear more about it. Yeah.
You know what? I think I tried to put that in perspective when I first started this lecture, that Nehru had such a humongous task before him when he became Prime Minister, that, if you sort of put yourself in his shoes, I mean, you will realize the kind of stunning sort of challenges that he had in front of him. So for somebody to be able to, I mean, I would say blaming him for everything that is wrong in today's India is very, very unfair, because I think a lot of the things that we are so proud of all came from Nehru's time. And talk about IITs, we talk about all our nuclear reactors, we talk about all our, dams, bridges, the educational institutions. All these were set up because of his own vision of having a India that was educated, that was, Then he had to contend with so many people all wanting having their own views. It's not easy to do that. Different languages, different, people in the South saying, how dare you impose Hindi on us? People elsewhere talking, so tackling all that, it is almost impossible task. So it's very unfair to blame Nehru for everything. But yes, the man had his faults. The man did have this vision of seeing himself as a sort of a ambassador of the downtrodden, and that sort of ultimately became his undoing. And he really was worried about the military taking over the country. Not just him, I think the Congress party itself was worried about it. And a lot of other decisions that he took were political decisions. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi's asks and other things that took place at a time when, of course, the Gandhi's acolytes now disagree that he didn't do that. But the fact remains that, at a time when we were actually fighting with Pakistan over Kashmir, the first war when they sent, just right after independence, Gandhi went on a fast saying that, we must give Pakistan the money that was due to them, because, we must be fair to them. So essentially what he was asking for, though it wasn't said directly, what he was saying was that, we give Pakistan the money that is due to them so that they can buy more arms and attack us. And I don't know. I mean, he had to deal with such political issues as well. So Nehru has been vilified sometimes for the wrong reasons. We owe a lot to the man, and you must also understand the sort of context of those times. There was famine. There was, all the scars of partition. The putting India together under that kind of a situation where you had to put, bring all these rulers into one place, convince everybody that yes, joining India would be a better thing. Kashmir, I didn't even bring in the whole issue of Kashmir, but taking Kashmir to the United Nations was one of the silliest things I've ever heard of. Of course, he may have had his own compulsions, but only human, I guess. So I think Nehru is being more vilified than he should be, because if you put yourself in his shoes, you'll realize that the man did a tremendous job. But like I said, he had his faults, and some of them cost us dearly. But he's only human at the end of the day. Does that sort of somewhat answer your question, Anushka?
Yes, sir. Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Because even if you look at Gandhi, the ideas of non-violence and a lot of things that he did in those days were very relevant in those days. But you try doing that today, I don't think they'll work. There are certain things that you do which are very time and place bound. You should not see them through today's prism. You must go back and look at the situation that was there at that time. It's always, easy to look back and criticize, but unless you understand the compulsions that were there then, it's unfair to do that.
Yes. Next question. Sengupta Sahab, I think you've explained many aspects of this subject. Before we close this, I would like just to mention a few things related to this military diplomacy, civilian supremacy. I read somewhere that during a conference of military commanders, Defense Minister V.K. Krishnan was there presiding over, and one of the generals said that I think so. And you know what Krishnan said? Generals never think. So that explains, the mindset of the then government, that they believed in civilian supremacy. They didn't go for, military supremacy, and the controversy about the creation of the CNC, and now of this Chief of Defense Services, and all that explains that there is still need for coordinated effort, both on the government side and on the the military structure, to have a coordinated approach towards India's defense needs, India's defense requirements, and then only we can think of having a satisfactory solution to many of the issues and all. So, with your permission, Sengupta Sahab, I would like to close this session, and once again thanking you for having taken trouble in spite of your recent illness, that you could help us in understanding this very difficult subject, which is not easy to understand, and I hope the students must have benefited. So thank you once again, Sengupta Sahab, for your time and your having explained things to the student. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It was, I wouldn't have missed this for the world. It was such a privilege and honor to sort of, take this class. I hope some of the people here will sort of, touch base with me in case you have questions. That we're more than happy to respond to you personally. And take a look at some of the people I mentioned in part of my as part of my talk today. I think you will realize that Indian foreign policy, Indian defense has come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And you perhaps understand why I am so sort of fascinated by the way countries interact with each other and how we are doing in that sense. And thank you very much, Dr. Gaur, for giving me this chance and opportunity to do that. I'm fully honored and privileged for that. And anything at all that I can do, I'm always at your disposal.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now I close the session with your permission.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you, all the best.